Welcome to the video. Real quick before we get started, just a quick warning that this video does contain rapid imagery, flashing, and portraits of animal death. Viewer discretion is advised.
Is the deer crossing the road, or is the road crossing the forest?
$400. Said that I was not supposed to.
This entire concept started when I was on a hike. I like to follow deer runs and trails that animals leave, so I'll start us on the trail that I started on and we'll follow the tracks to the termination point, which you'll see. So that's what I was doing, and you can see how well defined this trail is right now, yet there's no human footprints on it. And then it goes to this larger kind of byway here where it's clear that this is a main path. So I continue to follow the footprints. Now you can see my footsteps here. Gotta pause for a minute because there's a plane somewhere. Anyway, continue to follow this for about half a mile or so. And the amount of tracks stays rather consistent. And we can see here there's kind of a fork like that, and so one trail goes that way, the other one continues straight. And I decided to follow the trail that went to the left here. You can still see my footprints right there, and you'll never believe where they ended up. That's right. I mean absolutely no disrespect by the use of this animal in this video. I understand how powerful visual elements can be, and that's why I'm using him, because I intend to drive home a point here. Humans have explored for as long as we've existed. We've always been following rivers, summiting mountains in search of our next great homestead where game and food is abundant and where we don't have to work quite so hard. This led to new types of locomotion: canoes, boats, sailboats, eventually sleds, skis, snowshoes. Humans have always been good about innovating transport. These advancements in technology allowed our ancestors to travel further and further into the backcountry. Of course, everything was the backcountry. But for many of these folks, their footsteps would be the first in these new places. Imagine that. Imagine being the first person to ever see Mount Peel, to ever drink from that stream. The first human to ever do it. That is quite remarkable and just crazy to think about. For me, that type of travel and that type of adventure is an incredibly appealing thought. I'm sure it is for many of you as well, but it's that strive for expedition that pushed us to invent these new technologies, the first of which ever was the shoe, just putting a piece of tanned hide over your foot to avoid ailment. Pretty soon with the invention of the sail, we were beyond island-to-island travel, and we were traversing the largest expanses of water in just a matter of months. And while the Phoenicians were busy doing that, the rest of the world decided it was a good time to start innovating land travel. Carriages, horseshoes, saddles, and saddle boots were invented for the first time ever, and humans started riding horses and some other animals around. And before you know it, the internal combustion engine was roving across the world, and it gave way to the first automobiles across the first ever dirt roads. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, there was almost no roadkill. The few animals that died on trails and pathways were usually rabbits in the springtime that were a little bit too excited, and they ended up trampled underneath horses, which were generally traveling at speed. But as time went on and as automobiles got more popular, so too did their speed. And this gave rise to the invention of the word roadkill, a phrase that we hear very often. It's part of our culture. It's part of driving tests, it's part of driving as a whole, and it's part of the human experience at this point. It's part of living in a society. Roadkill is here. Imagine him saying that in California when the maximum speed limit in all of the United States was 20 miles per hour. If animals didn't have enough time to get out of the way then, they certainly don't now when your Ford F-150 goes 85 down the interstate. Despite the grim subject matter, roadkill is an inherent part of our culture at this point. There's some Fish songs about it, it's featured in horror movies quite prevalently, there's even a video game about it. Any ideas what that game is? You guessed it, Frogger. For some places, roadkill is part of their identity. When I say roadkill stew, what region of the United States do you think of? For me, it's the Deep South. And there are many rumors and myths and stories about the stereotypical hillbilly eating roadkill stew, but it turns out that they actually have some merit. In 1999, the state of Tennessee tried to pass a bill that would allow roadkill for human consumption. This brought up a great deal of controversy. One article was headlined, "Grease the Skillet, Ma, New Bill Will Make Roadkill Legal Eatin'," from the Knoxville News Sentinel. And the Commercial Appeal of Memphis published a separate article titled, "Better Fetch Old Granny's Recipe for Possum Stew." This new bill was passed for a short time, but something new started happening. There was actually a surge in roadkills, and at first folks couldn't figure out why, but it was soon determined that a new type of hunting was happening called bumper hunting, wherein folks would get old bumpers from old fire trucks, bush fire trucks, or police cars and put them on the front of their trucks and then intentionally run down animals on the road because that's easier than going out and hunting them, and it still gets you dinner at this point. But needless to say, the bill was redacted after bumper hunting started becoming a thing. Roadkill has touched many more places in our culture than just that, believe it or not. Take Joy HUNSBERGER, for example, who's been cataloging roadkill in photo albums since 1999. And do take another warning before these photos play on the screen because they are visceral and graphic. By far the most commonly struck animal on roadways is a deer, be it whitetail, redtail, mule, or otherwise. There are quite a few reasons for this. One statistic that I was able to find about this is that the United States experiences 1.2 million roadkill incidents a year that result in damage, and the claims that are filed usually end up an average of $3,300. But that's just from one insurance company in the United States. There's definitely many more accidents than that. I can't say what company specifically, but I can say that my buddy Jake provided me with that information. Although roadkill incidents occur year-round, they are by and large most common between the months of May and November. In the southeastern United States, they're most common between the months of September and November. This is also for a few good reasons, it turns out. You see, during the summer, most folks down there spend their time at designated campgrounds, at specific sites in the woods. And this allows animals time to adjust and to understand that this is where humans are, we should avoid this area. In addition, during these months, most folks spend their time indoors in air conditioning in the southeastern United States. It is a subtropical zone, so. During the summer, places outside of these designated areas are generally abandoned, almost, and as the weather cools, folks tend to get that one last hike in. They might start exercising, they might start walking their dogs, and to get to these places where they complete these activities, they'll take roads that haven't been driven on since last fall, because in the winter they might be inaccessible if they're country roads, and for most of the summer, like we just said, they're in other places. So cue the deer running across the road, unsuspecting and unprepared for traffic. You may not believe me, but most animals don't follow daylight savings time. Combine that with the fact that most travel for deer occurs around the hours of dusk, and you've got a brand new recipe for roadkill stew. In autumn, when time goes back an hour and daylight shrinks with every single passing day, it's easy to see how quickly rush hour overlaps with dusk, and thus the most common travel times for deer and humans is the same time. In the summertime, young deer can appear to be almost red in coat, but as the deciduous plants start to lose their leaves and become browner and browner, a deer's coat changes as well to retain that type of camouflage. The white spots disappear off of fawns, and the shades get darker to match their surroundings. Combine this with fleeting light, and it becomes a much more dangerous situation in the fall. Deer are simply harder to see. The orange-blazed women and men of our community get very excited toward the end of the summer and early fall when a cold front moves in. As a driver, you should use cold fronts as sort of a warning to be more cautious on the road. Just like humans, deer prefer colder weather to travel in. They are covered in fur, after all. Another major contributing factor is that young bucks have an innate behavior where in the fall they distance themselves from their natal birthing ground. This is a survival mechanism to avoid inbreeding with his mother and his sisters. He will distance himself from where he was born. And in doing so, once he does mate and does create offspring, they will be more physically fit for reproduction, and they will not be naturally selected for death, but they will be naturally selected for survival. This is also the same time of year when many young bucks run off for their turn to be naturally selected. Although they are well on their way to being completely physically developed, the cognition isn't quite there in many cases, and this leads them to take unnecessary risk that sometimes result in this. In autumn, the rut occurs. If you're unfamiliar, I'll just tell you that it's the time of year where testosterone spikes inside males, and they begin acting unusual. It's cuffing season, as it were. And during this period, they take crazy risks that don't even make any sense in most cases. And this often ends in roadkill because a buck will follow a doe across the road without even looking. And generally, it also ends up like this. All summer long, deer eat chlorophyll-rich green leafy plants, but as the seasons change and these leaves die and fall off, they're no longer nutritionally beneficial for the deer. And so they have to find plants that will weather the winter, that will survive long enough for them to be able to eat them routinely as the seasons change. And so they make new routes, they find new traffic to go to new places, and this results in deer sometimes appearing in signs where there aren't even deer crossing warning signs. Roadkill is a problem. It doesn't matter that deer are invasive to many different places. It doesn't matter that the gestation period for an eastern cottontail is only 27 days, and it doesn't matter that you didn't see the animal until it was too late. I think we'll agree that running something over with an internally combusting block of metal is bad because it takes a life pointlessly. An animal died or was maimed, first of all. You may have gotten hurt, and your insurance is to go up. And that's not even mentioning the bill that it's going to take to fix your vehicle after a roadkill accident. And as we spoke about before, roadkill is an ingrained part of our culture. But just because that's a fact doesn't mean that things have to stay this way forever. Things can change, and there are solutions that are working right now. And there are quite a few things that you can do, too. The first one is driving the speed limit. You'll save petrol, too, and you'll save money because most vehicles are designed to drive the most fuel efficient at 65 miles per hour. Other than that, you can practice safe defensive driving techniques. Drive sober, drive with your headlights on, don't drive distracted, and pay attention to what you're doing. This will decrease roadkill accidents astronomically if everybody is watching the road rather than watching their cell phone, especially at night. If you do find yourself head-to-head with an animal in an accident that's about to happen, there are a few things that you can do as well. Slow down, do not swerve or try and turn out of the way because you can very easily lose control and flip your vehicle, which nobody wants, so don't do that. Just stay the course, slow down, press on your brakes, and keep a straight path. Either the animal will move or you'll hit it, but you'll thank yourself that you didn't try and swerve and end up in a ditch, whether you hit the animal or not. Trust me, as a fellow human, I know that there are few things more terrifying than seeing a pair of piercing green eyes come out of the darkness. It's gasp-inducing, to say the least. But stay the course. Just slow down. You'll be okay. In most cases, the solutions for these problems come from a design in place, whether that be designing roads around migration routes in the first place, or integrating some simple physical solutions. A popular one is to install streetlights above highways. Another one is to build barriers on either side of the highway. This prevents animals from crossing straight across, and it reduces noise pollution for surrounding houses. We see this more in eastern states because things are more compact out there, but it is a solution that does work to reduce roadkill. However, it severely impacts habitat fragmentation, which is where habitats are fragmented, believe it or not, by a natural barrier. Even a flat roadway like this can cause habitat fragmentation and cause a divide between what lives on that side of the road and what lives on this side of the road. It breaks up the natural landscape and it makes it very difficult for animals to cross. But there are solutions that work on habitat fragmentation and this roadkill issue at the same time. One of them is called a bridge crossing, where a bridge is built over a road. It could be a road just like this. And on top of it, several layers of topsoil are added, and then native plants are planted there. They're sometimes taken care of by workers, but many times they're just left to survive with rainwater. And this provides an access route for animals to cross the road without getting hit by vehicles like this one that's coming right here. A similar idea is called a canopy crossing, and this is the same principle as the bridge design, and in fact sometimes they're used together. The bridge design is primarily prevalent in this field in Canada, and closer to South America and some places across the ocean we can see canopy crossings. But what this is it's essentially a net that goes right across the top of the road and connects the treetops from one side to the other, creating an artificial canopy, thus the name canopy crossing. But this is utilized in cases where there are small mammals going around, like monkeys, that need to cross, or perhaps where there's small birds that don't have the ability to have a prolonged flight time, so they need to frequently rest. Sometimes even artificial trees will be planted on top of these bridge crossings, and then in addition there will also be a canopy crossing above that. Unlike being cold at grandma's house, there are no blanket solutions for the issue of roadkill. There are many different types of solutions, but they generally work in hyper-specific scenarios. Like I mentioned earlier, we can all do our part to reduce roadkill, but the real issue is that roads are crossing native habitats for these animals. Even if the deer is invasive, it's still a life that's being lost because we needed to get somewhere. In places like India, where heavy pesticide use often goes unregulated, animals like deer can go out and graze in the fields, and then eventually they will get sick with the pesticides, and some of them may end up as roadkill on the side of the road. Vultures, which generally provide an ecosystem service by cleaning up and scavenging dead animals, especially on roadsides, will then get sick. It turns out that through the food pyramid, pesticides seem to transcend all the way through every single layer. So that's another reason not to go so heavy on the pesticides, folks. And clearly it doesn't really work, because the animal survived to get hit by a car. I hope that you learned something or a few things. Thank you very much for sitting next to me with a corpse for more than is normally an integrated part in our day. I hope you learned something today. Thank you very much for sitting next to me, sitting next to this corpse. I hope you learned something today. Thank you very much for sitting with me and this corpse for longer than is normally part of an average day. I really do appreciate your viewership. And if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them below and I'll do my very best to answer them. And the next time you see an animal on the side of the road or you narrowly avoid a roadkill incident, take a look around at your surroundings and try and identify some factors that may have contributed to that incident happening or almost happening. Usually you can find the answers. I'll see you next time. Remember to stay hungry for Roadkill Stew, and take care. Thanks, buddy. Another big contributing factor is that in the fall, young bucks experience an innate behavior whereas they distance them. In the autumn, when I don't like to judge, but that's exactly the type of person that probably hit this deer. Speed limit's 35, by the way. God dang it. I gotta read this so I don't look like a psychopath. There's part of someone's tail light underneath him. I look like a weirdo. I'm just sitting next to a corpse talking to a camera. There's a skeleton in my passenger seat. Is there a difference between being a weirdo and looking like a weirdo? Does it matter?